It is 12:02, so we'll go ahead and get started so I can officially say in the Midwest time zone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for jumping on today. Appreciate the time and for our guests here to outline NCGA's sustainability goals and how we can measure progress against them and moving forward. So to that end, just as a reminder for everyone, NCGA in 2021 published a sustainability report and sustainability goals on ways that we can move forward on continuous improvement on our environmental footprint for corn production. That process was quite intentional and grower-led, and did focus on a lot of established data and information gathering. One of those big pieces of data that we looked at was the Field to Market National Indicators Report, as it gave us a longitudinal data set on where conservation practices have been and a tendency of where they're going. So Field to Market has recently published an updated indicators report, and today we have Kelly Young and Gina Nichols on today to talk about that report, the evolution of that report, and how it's going to be used to and how we're going to be able to use it to measure progress towards our goals. And in addition to that, and developing the goals, we needed that historical data set to kind of take a look at what the baseline was and how we're going to possibly move forward at a more aggressive rate. And to that end, we have Gary Schnitkey on, who developed our baseline report and what that report can do to indicate what progress points we need to hit to further reach our sustainability goals and move beyond that. So this really contextualizes everything around all the work we did in 2020 with the announcements in 2021 and how we're going to move forward beyond into 2022 and the end of the decade to reach these goals. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Kelly and Gina to start talking with the Field to Market and National Indicators Report.
And I was muted. And again, I owe everybody $5. I'm so sorry. Hopefully you can see my screen okay. And if so, we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you so much. My name is Kelly Murray Young. I'm Senior Manager at Field to Market for Education, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I'd like to introduce my new colleague, Gina Nichols, Dr. Gina Nichols, who is joining us as our new Science and Research Manager, and she'll begin with us full-time mid-May. So thank you so much for the invitation to talk to you today about the National Indicators Report and exploring the national level sustainability trends for corn. So first, just a little bit about Field to Market. We're the Alliance for Sustainable Agriculture. We're a nonprofit based out of Washington, D.C. that unites this agricultural supply chain in defining and advancing sustainable agriculture. So we have membership across 5 sectors, including grower groups such as national corn growers and other state corn groups and other commodity groups. We have agribusiness sector that represent companies that either buy or sell products to or from growers. We have civil society representing environmental groups such as the Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund. Our affiliate sector includes governmental organizations such as Department of Agriculture and universities, largely land-grant universities and some press firms. Our brands and retail sector include more downstream customers such as Walmart, McDonald's, Kellogg's, PepsiCo. And part of Field to Market's work is through projects. We have accelerator projects where supply chain partners come together and support growers as they learn more about sustainability, as they begin to measure the outcomes from their farm, the impacts of their practices on environmental metrics, and also organizations can actually provide tangible financial or technical support as growers implement new practices and measure their progress against environmental goals. So right now we have about 72 projects in 35 states. And please visit our website to learn more about these projects. And certainly many of them are corn projects or corn soy rotation projects. And one of the products that Field to Market develops every 4 to 5 years is our National Indicators Report. So this is an assessment of trends in agricultural sustainability, environmental sustainability over time. So from 1980s on, and this most recent report looks from 1980 up till about 2000, where there's data available. And this is using publicly available information. So this is national in scope. It's focused on the outcomes. It's based in science and it's peer reviewed. So this is our 4th edition that was just released this past December. And of course, you can download the entire report, and there's a link at the end. So the data for this report comes from, as I mentioned, publicly available sources. A lot of it comes from the USDA, NAS, other government agencies, and other synthesis reports that are published. You can see some examples there on the right. There's a full reference section, citations for all the resources that we use to develop this report at the end of the report. So we're looking at the data that's available on a national scale, and you can look at the appendix for the methods that were used to develop this report using this data. So in this report, Field to Market addresses 8 environmental outcomes or metrics, 5 of which we have crop-specific data for between 1980 and 2020. So these are land use, energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, irrigation, water use, and soil erosion. These are quantitative measures that are reported on generally a per yield and or per acre basis. We also have 3 metrics that are more qualitative in nature, although we do provides a numerical result for them for individual users of our platform, but they are a little bit harder to, for really accurate quantification using modeling. But biodiversity, which looks at the potential for any farm or field to host wildlife. Soil carbon, so in our soil carbon metric, we calculate the confidence that either soil carbon is increasing or decreasing. It's not quantitative in nature, but we have also incorporated the Comet Planner, so growers can also use the Comet Planner to look at their soil carbon as well. And then water quality, we use the STEP water quality model that looks at losses of nitrogen and phosphorus through different pathways. And the crops that are included in the report are listed here. We do separate corn for grain and corn for silage, understanding that some corn that's harvested as silage may have been originally planted for grain, and that circumstances may have arisen that have caused the producer to harvest early and chop it for silage. So just overall, looking at the trends across all of the crops that we looked at for this report, there was great progress, 1980 onward for a bit in soil erosion, also greenhouse gas reductions and improvements in efficiency for things like energy, water, and land use. But things slowed down in the past 15 years. There has been slower progress toward these reductions and declines in the efficiency of using resources, water and energy resources particularly. We saw really great improvements in erosion, energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions in the 90s and 2000s, strongly related to the development of some of those technologies, right? We, herbicide technologies, the glyphosate ready crops really had some positive impacts that plateaued. So we saw that when there's really useful, scalable technologies that are rapidly adopted by growers, they can have really significant positive impacts on the environmental performance of a farming operation. And we have seen some increases in soil organic carbon in the last 25 years, with that being greatest in the past 15 or so years. So again, looking at this report, just overall among all the crops, that since the early 2000s, there really haven't been any large improvements in reducing soil erosion. You know, it's pretty flat. You know, the adoption of no-till, not using so much steel in the field anyway to manage weeds became a reality as a result of some of those technologies, those genetic technologies that were released, but we haven't seen much change since then, and there hasn't been a large uptake of cover crops yet. You know, we're only seeing it, I hear numbers anywhere from 3 to 5% of American farmland is actually in cover crops in any given year. There's been some increases, in the efficiency of overall energy use in commodity crop prediction. But there has been some increases we've seen recently in some energy use as a result of increasing use of the inputs. The production has gotten better, right? The energy efficiency of the production facilities has improved, but we're still using a lot of inputs that are counteracting any gains that are made in the production efficiency of those inputs. There have been improvements in greenhouse gas emissions when you look at it on a per yield basis. So when we look at how much carbon dioxide equivalent is produced per, bushel or pound, whatever that unit of yield is for that crop, it's gotten better, but on a per acre basis, it is either held steady or there have been increased emissions of greenhouse gases on a per acre basis. And this is mostly from nitrous oxide emissions. And we're really only seeing those improvements in greenhouse gas emissions on a per acre basis when there's less nitrogen being applied. And then irrigation water use is kind of all over the place. There's just really, we've seen just crazy weather for years now. There's so drought and flood, and sometimes, certain states will be kind of divided in half where there's flood on one side and drought on the other. So even though there have been improvements in some of the technologies for irrigation water delivery, we're not seeing any really significant trends. So again, overall, this is not yet corn specific, but just some of the recommendations for improvement. We know that really fine tuning fertilizer applications, particularly nitrogen fertilizers, is needed to reduce nitrous oxide emissions, which nitrous oxide is a really potent greenhouse gas. We're also seeing that planting in perennial ground cover, a diverse perennial vegetation within these larger agricultural landscapes, have multiple environmental benefits, including supporting greater biodiversity and water quality. And we also know that we need to understand a lot more about human behavior, social science, what drives farmer decision-making and how to support it. We need better understanding and more research around this so that we can design programs to help move farmers in the right direction, so we can really have the sustained improvements and really a transformation of the U.S. agricultural system. And again, to support growers in this, we need to understand their behavior, but we also need financial incentives, right? We need more innovative finance to support growers to help reduce the risk or share the risk, and technical support, assistance and support peer learning, so we can shorten that or flatten that learning curve for growers and not put it all on growers' shoulders. right, in taking that risk of changing the practice and getting through potential decreases in yield that that may happen, at least in the short term. So let's look more closely at corn, and we segregate corn for grain and corn for silage to for this report. We do treat them differently, although there's certainly a lot of overlap in between them. So when we start looking just at how much corn is being produced in the United States, we've seen since 1980 to 2020, there's been a slight increase in the acreage, the area of the United States being devoted toward corn production. Not a huge increase. There's some fluctuation, but there is a slight increase. And if you look at the lower right of the screen, this shows yields, and we can see pretty sharp increase in the yields from corn, right? We know that there's some great genetics out there. There's been a lot of improvements that way, integrated pest management, other strategies to really get a good harvest. So yields are up, although area is slightly increasing, but not much. Now this figure in the middle, we call it a spidergram, and so it looks at these five quantitative indicators, and they're plotted on this graph just to show improvement over time. So the closer to the center of this graph, the better the performance, right? We want to see scores right there at the very center of it. The further out they are to the edges shows greater room for improvement. And we can see that outer, kind of wobbly, 5-pointed figure, that's from the time interval from 1980 to 1989. And then at the very center, we can see it's the interval from 2010 to 2020, a lot of improvement. We can see that the greatest improvements happen early on, right? The rings, if we look at it kind of like tree rings, that ring, from the 1980 to 89 versus 1990 to 99, a lot of improvements in that time. Then as time goes on, the changes are smaller and smaller. So that rate of improvement has really slowed down over time. Okay, so let's look at energy use in corn for grain. And that energy use is largely driven by fertilizer. So, both the production and the application of that. So we can see that it has improved over time. That upper figure shows that trend of improvement in the energy use efficiency in corn over the past 40 or so years. And then if we look at the lower portion, it breaks down the components of that energy use. And we can see, that the lighter blue line that's on the top, that's the largest contributor. And again, that is fertilizer. And then irrigation is below that. The energy used to, pump and deliver irrigation water to the field is next. But really, it's fertilizer that takes a lot of energy to pull convert atmospheric nitrogen gas into fertilizer. And although it's gotten better, the manufacturer's gotten better, it's still a very energy consumptive process. Next, looking at soil erosion, as we mentioned earlier, we can see that really rapid drop from 1980 to about 2000 with the development of some of those technologies, and then it's plateaued since then. And we don't really distinguish. Oh, it says dies not. We don't distinguish between corn for grain and corn for silage in this case. So then now looking at the corn for silage spidergram, you can see it's fairly similar to that for corn for grain, although, we can see some of the irrigation water use efficiency. There was some kind of reversal of the improvement there. We can see between 1980 and 1990, but corn for silage, there's certainly room for improvement in irrigation water use and energy use, but the production of corn for silage has improved. has increased. Now looking at energy use and greenhouse gas emissions in corn for silage, there on the top, we're looking at the energy use, so we can see that kind of gradual decline between 1980 and 2020, and then looking on the right, those components of that energy consumption for corn for silage. Again, we see that kind of mirrored with fertilizer being the biggest part of that energy use. Now down below, we see the greenhouse gas emissions for corn for silage, and we see we're not really seeing any improvement there. And when we're looking at those components of greenhouse gas emissions, that's nitrous oxide, which is coming from nitrogen being released from the soil by microbial activity related to, some of it could be I guess volatilization, but just the loss of nitrogen to the atmosphere that's in the soil that was applied in fertilizer. And so this is really where there's a lot of room for improvement, right? And tightening up those nitrogen applications, finding ways to reduce nitrogen applications for better greenhouse outcomes. So there's if you're interested or would like to know more about how these figures were created and how the calculations were made, please go to the National Indicators Report, download it, and look at the Appendix A that provides really detailed methodology. All the data, you can access all the data that was used for the calculations. And I can send you a Excel spreadsheet that includes all the data that was used for this national level analysis. And also, it talks about some of the gaps in data. We can only do the reports based on available data. So the better the data that's out there, the better reporting, the accurate answers given, through surveys when the USDA reaches out, the better data we can get, the more accurate the report's going to be. And just understand too that you may not see your farm reflected in this. You may be performing, much better than the national average. This, we're not looking at regional data, but this is national data based, that's publicly available. So, don't fret if you feel like your farm is different from this, because as we know, every farm is unique. This is an average really across corn production in the United States. So again, you can download the data, you can look at the calculations, look at the trends, the background information, that's all available there. fieldofmarket.org/report. So that's all I have on the National Indicators Report. And if there's any questions, I can do my best to address them. And if I don't know the answer, I will look it up and get back to Julie or another representative from NCGA.
Great, thank you very much, Kelly. Really appreciate that. The Field to Market and National Indicators Report is a really fantastic resource that we all have. We enjoy the work that Field to Market does to continue that indicators report. It really helps the whole ag community measure our progress and where we need to focus investment and programs to continue or restart some of the trends as you had noted here. So I'll go ahead and pause to see if there are any questions. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so you can go ahead and unmute if you have anything. If not, we'll move on to the next speaker.
Kelly, this is Rod Williamson. You said many of the trends have slowed, but as I kind of see it, is that expected? Is that ordinary, or what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, so my thoughts, we haven't seen any technologies that have really been just so widely adopted, like when those traits were added, right, to commodity crops. Those were really quickly widely adopted, and so we saw some early benefits from those, but there is no silver bullet coming our way, right? So and this drive for high yields, I think, just, yield over everything, I think is probably part of the problem, in some of the plateau. So there's some hard conversations, I think, around balancing, looking at profitability versus just straight yields in production. So there's some larger conversations that need to happen, I think, and some better understanding needs to happen on how we can motivate farmers to implement some changes, particularly around fertilizer applications, so we can all enjoy those benefits. That's my opinion.
Thanks.
And Rod, it is interesting, and it's probably a good segue into Gary's report as well, as far as he helped us translate the NIR report into the baseline that we're going to be measuring the progress on corn's goals. But he also did the report that helped us lead in the goal setting process. And as he pointed out with that process, the increase in nitrogen efficiencies and the soil conservation, the cover crops and conservation tillage are kind of the big game changers that will lead us to getting to our goals. And as Kelly's referring to, like kind of a slowdown in new technologies, and also maybe that slowdown. So now that's that kind of that taking action piece on how do you catalyze change? How do you reach those kind of middle majority farmers that maybe haven't been as interested in making some of those practice changes? And that's where, I think Gary will help speak to how we can start to move the needle again. There was so much significant progress, and now it's slowing down, and it's not just being made by productivity gains and efficiencies as we've been seeing, but now it's time to really, work with farmers on getting that message across. Nathan's back with us. It looked like you were frozen there for a minute, Nathan. So
it was my Zoom just crashed and it rebooted itself quite efficiently, actually.
I was a little concerned. I thought, what happened to Nathan?
But we'll go ahead and move on. So yeah, the indicators report, gave us the good amount of information. But as we went through last year, we did engage Gary Schnitkey and his crew to kind of do an analysis of what those trend lines mean. What goals could be achieved. Our growers put a stake in the ground as what those goals are. And so that gives us an idea of what we need to do, what we need to invest in. But to really see pragmatically what that looks like, Gary's group did that analysis for us to see what needs to be done, and we really appreciate it. And the work that Gary's done, and especially with the Farm Docs series that continues to roll out, is a fantastic resource for growers out there. Really appreciate all the work with that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Gary to kind of outline the resources he developed for us and how we're going to move forward with these sustainability goals.
All right, thank you, Nathan, and I will get going here. Hopefully, we're now showing my screen, so we should be good to go here. As Nathan mentioned, Bruce Sherrick and myself helped NCGA quantify the sustainability goals, which are based on the field to market measures that you have just gone through. And I am going to take you through that process of quantifying that and show you what the NCGA goals are and how we develop the numeric benchmarks. Again, we developed specific numeric benchmarks for each of the sustainability goals set by NCGA. Those were the 5 first ones, I guess, that were specific to the crop: land use, irrigation, water use, soil conservation, energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions. Those goals were set in percentages, not this year, or not, that would have been 2020, I suppose, or 2020, 2021, when those initial percentage goals were set. You see them listed there on that side. Land use was 12%, irrigation water use was 15%, and 13% for both soil conservation energies use as well as greenhouse gas emissions. Those goals were set before the last field to market report that you just saw was released, which was done in December of 2021. So we took that report and then used that report to quantify those percentage goals into absolute measures. Again, we looked at the 2021 report, did some comparisons to the 2016 report. I'm just showing here the spider graphs that were shown in the last, or Kelly shown in the last presentation. Again, each one of those shows the benchmark that we are going to be looking at: land use, soil erosion, irrigation, water use, energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions. Just pointing out some differences between the 2016 and 2021 report. 2016 did the report did these on 5-year averages. 2021 report did those on 10-year averages. We're going to suggest, and NCGA has adopted, looking at these environmental measures over a 5-year period. And so they're going to be the benchmarks are going to be slightly different than what in the 2021 report. Again, what we did, we have our goals: 12%, 15%, 13%. Then for the last 3, we averaged the 2016 and 2020 value as a benchmark. That data was provided from field to market. Kelly, excuse me, showed you where all that data was available from. We downloaded it, read all the appendices, as well as some other, quite a few other material. And then we took those average benchmarks, applied the percentage goal, and then we came up with a goal value for the 2026 and 2030 values. And we believe that you need to get an average, because 1 year could make a goal go up or down. The reason why is it could go up or down is yields, for example, and just take 2012 drought and put it in or out of one of those goals, and it can have a pretty direct impact on those goals. What I'm going to do now is go through each one of the goals and show you what the land use, irrigation, water use, soil conservation, energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions would look like, and what the 2026 and 2030 values are. Land use. Land use is the goal unit is planted acres per bushel. All right. Most farmers would think of this the opposite way: bushels per planted acre. It's just exactly the reverse. So, or inverse of that. So as yield goes up, this measure will go down, which is a measure of improvement. We're always, all of these measures on these spider graphs, as you move in, you get better or more sustainable. So planted acres per bushel, as you're looking at that, if you increase yield per acre, you increase the land use benchmark. The percentage goal was 12%. If we quantify that, that's 0.0059. And again, that's planted acres divided by bushel. The 0.0059 was the 2016 value. 0.0052 would be the benchmark goal. Again, if you look at that, if you're looking at the graph here, that pretty much matches what the trends will be. I will point out this is 2012, just to give you a feel for what a year like 2012 does to that. And obviously going back to the 70s and 80s in here, we had some poorer yields, but we're projecting out a 12% goal. That would largely be met by having the typical yield increases that we have been looked at in previous years. And then you can make arguments about whether or not that those yield trends are increasing or decreasing. Personally, when I look at the data, it looks like they're increasing, and I think you can make a good case for why they would continue to increase at a somewhat of an increasing rate. Again, the methodology here used in field to market is bushels of corn produced in the US, and acres planted in the US. Both of those come from NASS. So those are National Agricultural Statistics Service numbers, and take those numbers and come up with the 12% goal. Irrigation water use. Our goal unit is measured in acre inches per bushel, and we set a percentage goal of 15%. The 2016 through 2020 value was 0.159. A 15% increase would be 1.35. Over on the right, or excuse me, the left, the green line shows those measures in the 2016 report. The blue line shows the measures in the 2021 report. Those measures will change over time. The reason why they change are well documented in Field to Market. Sometimes the data sources for these sources change the underlying the data. And just to give you an example, yields can change after a release of a census survey. So the data itself can be revised, and also methodologies will likely be revised over time to reflect improvements in measurement and in the science. Again, here's the irrigation water use measure. We presented a 15% goal. Again, the methodology is irrigation amount divided by irrigation yield divided by non-irrigated yield, and the data is taken from USDA's Irrigation and Water Management Survey. Excuse me. Meeting that goal should be setting the goal that we did seems reasonable, particularly given the improvements or advances in water technology that are, or irrigation technology that are occurring. So setting a 15% goal seems reasonable. And again, you can see what that would look like here. That measurement period would begin at 2026 and go through 2030. So this is what we would be measuring right here. So that's irrigation water use. Here is soil conservation, and you see the green, or the orange line is the 2016 report. The 2021 report revised, excuse me, revised those number, and here you see the application of the goal. The goal unit is measured as tons of soil loss per acre, and our goal is 13%. The benchmark was 4.65, or from 2016 to 2020 value is 4.65. This goal would be 4.04, or excuse me, 4.046. So here's what that trend would imply compared to the other ones. As you can see, as Kelly mentioned before, we had sizable declines here up to roughly 2,000. You can attribute that to a number of things. Part of that's a switch from moldboard plowing to reduced tillage. Traits came out here in the 1990s, and we've been fairly stable through 2020. The methodology used to come up with this measure comes from simulation results, in particular watershed erosion prediction model and wind erosion prediction system models. We talked to Patrick Flanagan about those. So those models are used to come up with that report. The important thing in those models, as far as soil erosion, revolves around cover on the soils. So tillage, reducing tillage, and increasing cover crops will reduce soil erosion. And if you think about it, I mean, any soil erosion model, reducing the tillage, leaving less cover, or more cover, excuse me, over the land will result in a reduction in those soil erosion measures. Again, these are model-based and USDA models, and we also suggested that NCGA continue to evaluate the performance of those models as we move forward and making sure that they're capturing all the changes that are going on. Energy use. Here's our energy use. BTUs per bushel, and we set a 13% goal. The 2016 to 2020 benchmark was 38,382. The 2026 to 2030 goal is 33,392. So you can again see what was put in the 2016 report, 2021 report made slight revisions, and then we're going down here. Given that we're measuring this in per bushel, just general trend increases will continue that trend and keep it moving down. As Kelly mentioned, and here are the major items that impact energy use: synthetic fertilizers, management, irrigation, post-harvest, crop protections, and seed. And synthetic fertilizers are a large component of that. And backing up even more to that, it's nitrogen fertilizer that causes that. The nitrogen fertilizer Haber-Bosch production process and the use of natural gas, release of CO2 natural during the production of fertilizers is a large component of this energy use measure. So as you're looking forward, anything that causes fertilizer use to fertilizer use, if it would remain stable per acre, but bushels increase, this measure would go down. Stable fertilizer use, but bushels increase, this measure would go down as specified here. I would also so anything that increases nitrogen and fertilizer efficiency will be key in making sure that that goal can be met. I would also mention that as we move forward, fertilizer manufacturers are moving processes to produce green and blue ammonia, and those should aid in meeting this goal as well, and making sure that that's credited would be a good thing. Greenhouse gas emissions and is pounds of CO2 per bushel. 13% is the goal, 10.8 is the CO2 equivalent, is the 2016-2020 goal, and 9.4 is CO2 equivalent. And by the way, my green and blue really applies to greenhouse gas emissions, less so than energy, but here's the energy goal, 13%. Recall that this is per bushel, and here's the 2016 and 2020 report, and as that continues to go down, if yields continue to increase, that goal is achievable. And again, anything that has to do with fertilizer use, synthetic fertilizer, as was mentioned, nitrogen oxygen emission is a pretty key part of that. So anything that makes nitrogen efficiency use more higher per bushel. And I would also suggest that we want to make sure that credit's given for timing of nitrogen fertilizers in the future. So those greenhouse gas emissions and goals you can see there. That's the numeric setup of the goals for the greenhouse, for the 5 measures, and how we went about it, and how they were presented to NCGA. So I'll stop there and take questions and turn it back to Nathan.
Great, thanks a lot, Gary. Really appreciate that overview. I really hopefully points out to folks who are watching this that the goals that the growers set were achievable and pragmatic, and to that end we're looking forward to the programs and investments like we've seen with the Climate Smart Agricultural announcement out there that can really achieve these goals and hopefully exceed these goals. if we're going to get these trends kicked back in and continuing at a more aggressive rate. So with that, I'll go ahead and pause, see if there are any questions for Gary at this time.
By the way, there is one question. The greenhouse gas and energy use is per bushel, so they are per bushel values.
All right, there are no questions for Gary. Are there any other questions, comments, input that you'd like to share with everyone as we move towards these the goal implementation? I will say that you know, when we look at different programs and stuff that's out there, you know, at the states there are a tremendous amount of conservation programs that are underway. And to that end, you know, we want to see continued support and continued funding for those programs. And that's one of the big focuses of one of the big tactics that we're using with the climate smart agriculture announcement that was made. And currently a lot of different groups are out there applying for those grants. NCGA, along with our partners and with pork and soy included in that. So our Farmers for Soil Health is really looking at how we can support continued investment to lower that barrier for growers to implement practices like cover cropping. And we're getting that pulled together right now, and we will be reaching out again to the states and everyone to understand that, you know, letters of support will be helpful to that end. But yeah, if we're looking at the kind of investment needed to shift a significant number of acres into continued conservation practice work, it's gonna take a concerted effort on that. And yeah, we've got the data behind what we need to do. Now we just need to do it. So with that, any other thoughts?
We certainly appreciate the work with Field to Market. Oh, Kelly's joining here by camera, and iFAR, Gary and his, you know, partner Bruce, and helping us to utilize this data to help move corn forward with your environmental sustainability goals, and also a plan of action for how we can move the needle. So it's really helpful.
All right. Well, with that, we definitely thank you for your time, and we thank our speakers today for providing their insight and information and their continued work to support the corn growers out there. So with that, I wish you all a very good day. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.